Here is how to use your body for closing argument. This is the moment, because it's argument, to plant those feet, take a stand, do not budge, hold your position. That's how strongly you feel about the rightness of your cause. Argument is time to power up those double karate chop gestures. This is what argument looks like. If you and I were having a friendly argument about where to eat dinner and I said, I ate there last week, that restaurant is terrible. That double karate chop is the gesture we naturally use when arguing. This is the time to look those people in the eye and tell them the truth. You don't want to stand up and read your argument. You want to look them in the eye, because credibility is so much about that. And as you're setting up the body to stand and get ready to gesture and look at them, before you say anything, hear the silence in the courtroom. Like an athlete engaged in take your mark, get set, before you go, hear that silence. Because silence is when the thinking happens. And argument is so much about let's think together through what the facts mean. Now it's time to infer and conclude and argue about those facts. That takes time. Give us the time to think. In other words, give us the silence. Every silence you use implies, think about that, and think about that. Begin that silence as you prepare the body to speak. Then the body is ready to argue your closing argument. As you think through your closing argument, don't restate the facts and tell us the story again. I was teaching at a trial ad program recently, and a federal judge was on the faculty. And he said this about closing argument. After every trial, he debriefs the jury. And the most common thing he hears from jurors is this: do lawyers think we're stupid? Why do they say things over and over and over again? So don't tell us the story again. We know it. We heard it in opening statement when you previewed it. We then heard the whole story when the witnesses testified during the trial. And now it's closing argument. We know the story. What does it mean? That's your goal on closing argument, is to tell us what does it mean. And therefore, you want to think about how what we're doing in the courtroom is answering the question. If it's a civil case, who's right, the defendant or the plaintiff? Who's to blame, the defendant or the plaintiff? If it's a criminal case, is he guilty or not? So think of argument as what you're doing with your brain and your voice, as having a component that links up the questions you are asking and the pattern of gesturing that will both ask and answer that question. Here's what I mean. So here is a gestural template for argument. The very thing we do with our hands, you could of course do on your notes, again arranged horizontally as I suggested for opening statement. So here's the question, members of the jury. That questioning gesture will allow you to open up. So think about the questions the jury will have when they go back in to deliberate. You need to ask and answer from your point of view those questions. So here's the gestural template, and then I'll plug some information into that template. It begins with the question: is he guilty, if it's a criminal case? Is the defendant to blame for that car accident? So look at that sweeping, open, questioning gesture. That's where it begins. And then to answer that question, we need some facts. And you will draw those facts from diverse sources, from a witness here, from an email there, from a document here, from an exhibit there. And so once we've laid out the question, could we then stack on the shelf with your gestures those facts? And then, of course, once you've asked the question, stacked the facts on the shelf, conclude. He's guilty, or the defendant caused the accident. So it's a simple template. Ask the question, stack the facts, conclude. Here's how I do it in my own work as a communication consultant. Very often people ask this question: so should we really gesture in the courtroom? There's the question, members of the jury. Well, let's look at the facts. Number one, the experts all say that it is the ultimate natural behavior. Everybody gestures, so it's natural. The other things the experts testify to is that gesturing helps us think and remember. Gestures help us fetch the language. So if it's natural and it helps us speak, there's also this component. It actually helps the jury comprehend. They understand better. Well-defined gestures often are the most important thing when aligned with language to get the jury to understand. So members of the jury, if it's natural and it helps us talk, and it helps the listener comprehend, of course we have to gesture. Question, facts, conclusions. So let's imagine in a trial setting how that might work. So let's ask the question, can you really trust that witness? Well, let's corroborate his testimony and let's put this on the shelf, someone else corroborated it, or there's this email that corroborates it, or there's this document that corroborates it. So yes, you can trust that particular witness. Or we could ask the question in that defective products case. So did the company know that the product was defective? There's the question with the questioning gesture. They knew because of this testimony, this document, this email, this exhibit. They knew, members of the jury, that their product was defective. It makes arguments suddenly so much simpler because there's a question, there are facts that support your conclusion, which of course is very different than telling us a story. We know the story. Please don't tell us the story again.